Security Advisor John Bolton. We have two terrific gentlemen to talk about all this tonight. With us here in New York, Richard Haass, a diplomat under President George W. Bush with experience working for both the Pentagon and the State Department. He currently serves as president of the Council on Foreign Relations and is author of A World in Disarray, American Foreign Policy and the Crisis of the Old Order. Also with us from Seattle, retired four-star U.S. Army General Barry McCaffrey, a decorated combat veteran of Vietnam and former battlefield commander in the Persian Gulf. His global portfolio includes the Korean Peninsula. I think I got my George Bush wrong. George Herbert Walker Bush.
Actually worked for both of them.
Worked for both Bushes. Well, if you can have that on your resume, I guess you're doing well, too. Mr. Haass, I'm going to quote you back to you.
Very unfair.
You said this on Twitter today. The unraveling of G7 summit works in North Korea's favor, as the real Donald Trump will not want to bust up two summits in a row, lest people conclude he is the problem. Increases incentive for Kim to up his asks and limit his compromises, and for Trump to do the opposite. Hardly the ideal context. I wasn't planning on asking you about our new effort to bottle Canada's nonstop aggression. But there is that. There was the G7 before there was Singapore.
No, absolutely. And normally you would see allies as a way of pooling strength. Essentially, we wouldn't approach North Korea or any other issue alone. We'd always package it with countries that were on our side. So a strong showing in Quebec would have been a perfect way, one, to approach North Korea, and two, to reassure South Korea and Japan. Instead, you have a situation where obviously we distance ourselves from our allies for reasons that remain inexplicable, which makes again, our allies in this region nervous, and I think does put pressure on the president, or he put pressure on himself now, because you don't want to have two unsuccessful meetings in a row.
In a perfect world, that G7, as you say, is kind of a pep rally. It gives you momentum going into your dicey summit overseas. You say for reasons we don't know. Do you have a theory as to why an American president would go in and break the furniture in the durable post-war alliance?
My own explanation, Brian, is two things. Donald Trump, from the get-go, has believed two things deeply. One is that the burdens and costs of American world leadership far outweigh any benefits. He actually believes that. And two, he believes, as he would say, that we have been taken advantage day in, day out by the global trading regime. So he had to confront both issues here. He had to confront NATO, in general, U.S. allied burden sharing, and he had to confront the trading regime. And so he picks on an issue like with Canada about dairy, which is what, 1/10 of 1% of the U.S.-Canada trade relationship. Meanwhile, we're in slight surplus with Canada on manufactured and so forth. And it was as if he was looking to pick a fight, which seems to me either he was unable to grasp the reality of the relationship or unwilling to, and then you get into the whole political conversation. But for whatever reason, it was damaging. It's damaging with allies. It basically shows that having a larger relationship with us doesn't count for a lot, that this administration at any moment is willing to focus on a particular and drive that home regardless of the larger damage it does, regardless of the larger degree we benefit from the relationship.
Because it's important to the boss. Barry McCaffrey, I know you've been watching the coverage tonight. Let's see here. Where are we? Here. Okay. Hi, General. I was looking for a camera so I could talk to you. What's your view? I mean, history has been made already in this summit. There's that. What's your view so far of what you've seen and the pitfalls?
Well, look, go back to Richard Haass' point for 1 second. The last time I testified to the Senate, it was on the Mexican border, 2,000 miles, and I pointed to the 5,000 miles of the U.S.-Canadian border and alleged that the only thing safer than living next to Canada might be next to the Vatican. So the whole notion of using national security as an argument to bash Canada is really unsettling. Look, looking at Singapore, a couple of thoughts. One is some good can come out of this. I think dialogue, it's potentially going to reduce the tensions in the short run. As many of your panelists have pointed out, the major believable short-term threat are North Korean artillery bombardment of the south. If we thought it would lead to denuclearization, we're sadly mistaken. It's never going to happen. Kim Jong-un's a clever brute. He's murdered more than 300 of his senior officials. There is absolutely no reason to believe what he would say. And I think the biggest problem we've got going into this talk this time was he's playing a long game. He's going to be around for 40 years. He's going to assume that President Trump's gone in 3 years or maybe 8 years. So he's going to promise enormous payoffs in denuclearization over the coming 10 years and try and get anything he can now. The next president of the United States is not going to roll this stuff back. So I think we're in a very tricky position, but in sum, I think it's probably a helpful thing that President Trump did break through the stasis and got a dialogue going.
Well, Barry, back up to your first point, and I want a parting thought that's on the nice side. The McCaffrey grandchildren are probably safer as a result of this summit happening in Singapore?
Yeah, I think so. And by the way, I've got a grandson headed to the Air Force Academy this summer, so it's of great interest to our families. I think Kim Jong-un, by the way, I got a very angry tweet 12 hours ago, said, of course, Kim Jong-un is seeking, like every leader, a prosperous and happy population. Nothing could be farther from the truth. He doesn't want an open society. He wants the economic constraints lifted. He's got to rejuvenate his armed forces. He wants an industrial capacity. He wants to be recognized. That sort of thing can happen, but he will not give up a nuclear capability. He's sure, correctly, that's why he's in Singapore with the eyes of the world on him.
Richard, you got to love that. The guy has stared down the North Vietnamese and the Iraqis, but send him a tweet and that'll get his attention. Richard Haass, last word. Will the Haass grandchildren be safer because of what happened today?
At the risk of a cliche, way too soon to say, North Korea is going to agree in principle to denuclearization, won't do it in practice. Barry's right. The danger is either the summit breaks up with bad news, or the good news is we end up giving too much for too little. And we've got to be really careful not to do anything that weakens our military presence on the peninsula or our alliance unless North Korea fundamentally deconstructs the conventional military threat it poses to South Korea and Japan.
Thank you. A treat to have you here in New York at this late hour, as it is both gentlemen. Richard Haass, General Barry McCaffrey. Thank you both. Coming up for us, is President Trump any closer to that goal we keep mentioning, denuclearization?